So that housing options
moved.
bit will move now to adult services.
It will be moved. I think 1st of April is the dedicated point. So we will split out these reports from the 1st of April.
Okay, thank you. I've got some further questions, and it's kind of ties in with this, where when I'm trying to look at the budget, I'm trying to work out where the underspends, overspends have been managed, and where the money has come from to balance off an overspend or even an underspend. You know, where's that underspend come from? And I'm not able to see that information in the current table that's produced on page 21. So, for example, there's an underspend in museums. I don't know what that underspend is there, and is that okay? Should we be concerned as Scrutiny that museums have underspent their money? And that's kind of stuff I'm not quite able to see from that table. And in terms of the feeding back into what you've just said about some of it comes in as grant money and some is earned income from obviously regulation fees, charges. When we look at current income, is there any way of breaking that down into what is budget, what is grant income and what is income from regulatory income streams that we operate? Because I can't see where something is maybe struggling that I might want to see that is struggling, or when money's not come in that altered, because it's all banked in with grants that have come in. Does that make sense?
I'll make a start if I may, Chair. So in terms of the what was it you said? Museums, sorry. So in terms of the museums, it's to do with the devolution of the South Somerset heritage assets. So we devolved that across to Yeovil Town Council. We did that partway through the year, and off the back of that, it's showing as an underspend in year. So it's not a problem. It's kind of planned, but it was planned to happen after the budget was set, so it shows as an underspend. So in future years that will be removed because it's a permanent change, but it's not an area where we have stopped spending, as an example. It's simply the reflection of that devolution happening. So in many ways that's positive. That shows that the devolution has worked from a financial arrangement at least. In terms of the breakdown, so the current income budget is whatever was approved, so whatever was set by council, regardless of whether that comes from a proportion of council tax or fees and charges. I don't think grants are in that budget unless they were grants that had already been agreed at the time of budget setting. So the housing options grant, effectively, that sits separately and outside of this, which is why in a revenue perspective it shows as an overspend, but is then topped up from another location because that grant was agreed after the budget was set.
And that's really helpful to understand. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that if I'm trying to look at where the issues are, where the problems are, I can't get that information from the table as it sits at the moment, because, you know, I understand that things are being used to ensure a balanced budget across the whole portfolio, but I can't see what is being moved to cover what things, or what is being allocated elsewhere to mitigate a problem somewhere else. I'm not getting to see from these figures. I mean, your explanation about the museum is very, very helpful, but I couldn't have grasped any of that from the report. It's just, if we are here to scrutinise what's going on in all these areas, I'm not seeing the information that I can actually work out if there is an issue somewhere because income streams are down and what have you.
Yeah, I get the point. I think what we try to do in the narrative that follows the table is break down those things that we consider to be material. So in the context of the £37 million budget, or what the final number was, £29,000 underspend. Firstly, it's an underspend, so it's positive in regards to scrutiny of the numbers. Secondly, I would argue it's not material in the context of the overall budget. So when we look at the narrative that follows, it tends to track those high-level changes, either a large-scale overspend, large-scale use of grants, large-scale underspend. So I guess it's difficult from a report author's perspective to know exactly what scrutiny members will be interested in, because your interests may not necessarily follow how material that change is in finance terms. But if there's areas of particular interest, we can make sure we can update the narrative. We can make sure we provide that in more detail if that's what you're seeking.
Yeah, I think, you know, sometimes we get asked questions about things like what's happening with museums, what's happening with, right, and then we don't always have that information to hand. But I understand you're prioritising the biggest areas. When I'm still a bit concerned about you saying that some grants are incorporated if they've already come through, and then some come later. And how does that get reflected in these budget things that we look at? Is there any way of breaking down within that current income budget what is already agreed grant money within these tables?
To cover a few points really. So the whole purpose of the report, it is a strategic report. So it does, the main focus is to report into executive committee, corporate resources committee, and then obviously filter out into each of the individual scrutiny committees. So there's a consistency around. So this report is initially sent to the corporate resources committee, who are obviously responsible for the budget, and then the element downwards from that into all the other scrutiny committees is exactly the same as that report. And the whole purpose is that if there is a particular area that each scrutiny would like to review, then obviously we can do that as part of those individual scrutiny meetings. So it is a strategic report. The focus is generally on, as Chris has said, the focus on the changes from each month rather than the overall underspend, as it were, because otherwise we're just repeating every month the same thing. So we're trying to focus on the things that have changed rather than necessarily the overall underspends or overspends, as it were. It is difficult. So museums, as Chris has said, is a very low risk budget, as it were, because it's a small amount. It's very difficult within this report to have narrative on each of the individual lines within the report. That would make it a massive report. So if you request for information on a certain element of the report, then obviously we can go away and provide that. But it is a high level scrutiny, a high level strategic report, rather than necessarily going down into individual details. But also grant income as well. So sometimes we know what the grant income is. Sometimes we won't know until later on during the year. So we have to make an estimate. So that's why sometimes it's included and sometimes it's not. I could try and come up with a list of all the grant income we receive for each within community services, if you wish. That's one of the things I could look at.
So I would be interested to see what element of the income is grant income. I mean, as a one-off exercise, just to sort of get some idea of what proportion of income comes from what source.
Okay.
As long as it's not too much work, wouldn't want to overload you with a whole massive project. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be by every level of service. You know, just to get some idea of what is grant income and what is what's vulnerable, I suppose, and what's safe. You know, it's that idea of what things are protected by grants in the main and which ones have a more vulnerable element to them.
Yeah, I can look into that. I'll also look at the reserves. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my overall question was going to be about budgeting, but I'll come back to that in a minute, because clearly there's an underachievement or underspend. But I'll ask my questions in a moment. I've got Marcus first, then Susanna.
Yeah, mine was more of a pick up on something Chris said regarding, and it was just a very quick comment about, you know, housing having issues and not just as is elsewhere. And I would love to know, exactly what they are, because that's quite a, you know, we all know as councillors, we all know the pressures on housing, etc. And I wonder but then again, is that this committee, or should I really be getting on adults as well if I want to ask questions about housing? But is it, so I'd just like to know more about the detail of what are those issues. Is it just rents aren't high enough? I appreciate the private renters sector pulling out. It's happening all over the place, and they're finally, you know, but that's only pulling out with individual buy-to-let owners maybe. And you know, there's a case in Watch It where big investment companies bought many of the houses on new estate and renting them out at £1,000 a month, where obviously if there's social housing there'd be a little bit less. But the fact that a big company can do that, but for some reason as a council we're still very, sorry, I'm going on a sidetrack issue. Yeah, we've always been reluctant on borrowing too much for the HRA, so we could actually just build or even purchase housing. I know we've done it in the past, and I know we did it at Somerset West and Taunton. And I should think there were very successful purchases, and in the end worked out to be very well. But it just does worry me that private investment companies can bulk buy housing to let out. But I'd just like to know about, have we got, what's the word I'm looking for? Have we got with the housing revenue budget, have we got a problem coming down the line?
So not in the housing revenue account, no. So the housing revenue account is managed through tenants' payment of rents, and then we borrow via the council. So the council is effectively borrowing, but a slightly preferential rate for the HRA. So it's PWLB minus 0.6, I think it is, %. But all that borrowing has to be serviced by the HRA. So there's not an issue per se about the HRA borrowing, so long as the business case on income is able to service that debt long term and manage the properties and everything that goes with that, tenancy management, void loss, etc. So that's where we come into challenge, is whether the HRA business plan can borrow the money on the basis of its payback and return, and that return, of course, is limited to either affordable or social rents. So a private company can come along, borrow whatever they think, and in their business case they're clearly getting a higher level of rent than we would ever be able to achieve, and therefore they're looking at a very different financial model. And private equity into this area is a challenging matter. There are losses in private rented. We can see that. You can see that on Rightmove, even if you just look at what is currently available and look at the prices that are being charged. So that is an impact. So the impact for this council is one of growing pressure, growing volumes of people seeking support, limited stock, whether that be our own registered providers or private stock, and then temporary accommodation placements, and at times the need for us to use Airbnb as part of that temporary provision. That's expensive, as our hotel placements. So you will see around the country, I think there's one council that specifically cites housing as their reason for submission of a section 114 notice. So we're not at that point. It's a general fund pressure. It's a growing general fund pressure, but at the moment it's not as significant as our other pressures in adults and children's.
Is the temporary accommodation issue, as private landlords sell off and everything else and tell people to get out, is the TA pressure, is that a time bomb waiting to happen? The statement I've just made.
If there is a reduction in available stock, then it will add more pressure into the council's ability to allocate people homes, and it will add more pressure into the TA marketplace, wherever that reduction comes from and whatever the cause of it is.
Okay, thank you. Susanna, please.
Oh, can you hear me? It was just really going back to what Christian was saying earlier about this being a kind of an overview rather than an in detail dive into things. But maybe, what might be helpful from our perspective is if something's showing up as red, then there's clearly a problem. At that point, could there be a link so that we can see more in more detail, rather than us having to come up with specific questions and put them to you, so that we can see and understand why something is in an overspend situation? Because otherwise, as Dawn was saying, this kind of is slightly meaningless if all it is showing us the situation but not showing us why. And the other thing I'd just be interested to know is, do we know what the percentage of the funding is spent on so-called temporary accommodation? And what percentage of the overall housing budget is spent on temporary accommodation?
So we will do, but I'll need an officer from that area to be able to break that down. So yeah, we'll absolutely be able to describe that. It doesn't sit within this area now, it's moved across to adults. But we will, as a council, we will know that information, yes.
It's just like that really gets us into understanding how big the problem is and how impossible it's going to be to resolve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, I was going to ask a general question about budgeting, really. Looking at this, at the beginning of the year, this time last year, I guess, Chris, he either requested money on the basis of a budget and was handed it and said, right, this is it. And the expectation, I guess, is that he would bring it in somewhere within, I don't know, 1-2% at the end of the year, either up or down. I mean, that would be, we're talking normal circumstances here, not the abnormal ones that we are at the moment. And I think what I'm trying to get at is, having been given a budget to deliver services, there seems to be, the imperative has suddenly come in that you've actually got to cut back on what was originally given. And there are two areas that I've spotted here. There was a budget for environmental health, a net budget of 4.027 million, and we've underspent on that by almost £250,000. Now, environmental health is one of the services that I think we would struggle to do without. And so I'm just wondering. And the other one I picked up was housing enabling, which is £100,000 underspent. And so, whilst in the grand scheme of things, underspent is really good, and it's just what we, you know, every penny counts. I think what bothers me most is the impact that has had on services, and whether they are a genuine underspend, or whether the council has chosen not to do something in order to save money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it absolutely does. And I think I've said before that there is always a consequence to us underspending. So occasionally we'll find that there's a genuine efficiency. We've been able to join some things together, deliver the same standard of service and make a saving. So genuine efficiency. However, the bulk of this will be around us stopping spending, not delivering the service to the standard that we expected. So off the back of the financial emergency, we were all instructed to stop spending. So we were told, do not spend money on things unless they are absolutely statutory to that level, or unless they are a health and safety requirement, and that requirement is required now. That's my language, but that is effectively the imposition that was placed upon all officers of the council in order to close the budget gap. I think you'll look back over the communities area and see that we have consistently underspent overall. There have been some overs and some unders, but we have consistently underspent, and we've consistently followed that instruction and that guidance set by the executive and more widely by full council. So, but I will reiterate the point, there are consequences to us doing that. That means we have had to reduce down in some areas services. Some of those are easier to track than others. It's not always easy to see the exact consequence of making that reduction. Some of this will come by us holding vacancies. So obviously we knew we were progressing towards a workforce restructure, and in certain areas we could see that those services would be impacted by that proposal, and we've chosen to hold vacancies in that area so that we didn't place ourselves into a position of recruiting people and then having to place more people at risk of redundancy than we would have done by holding vacancies. But yes, but there are consequences to this. It's not without issue.
Okay, well, moving on then, bearing in mind this year is almost done, how is the process going for next year? So I'm guessing you're doing your sums, you're going to come up with a budget for communities, or it's left to, you know, where it sits at the moment, which will be presented to Christian and his colleagues, and somebody will say, okay, you've got that. But I'm assuming the expectation is that you will do your level best not to spend as much, not to spend that money.
Yeah, so what we've done effectively is taken this year's budget, we've then reviewed it and taken out any areas of permanent overspend. So the leisure contract arrangements, that's an ongoing saving, so we take that out. And what you'll see in my assurance statement that was appended to the budget pack is you will see the large scale changes. So large scale reductions against that budget, and then large scale inputs into that budget where we've had pressure bids. The budget is now community, place and economy, not individual in the way we're currently looking at it, but you will see all those large movements in and out, and then the net position is the budget we have in which to operate for 25-26. But we are still in a financially challenging position, and the expectation is that whilst the budget has been set, the target is not to spend it. The target is to spend below that to support any other volatility that may come along during 25-26.
And I think we've said this before, but communities by and large has always operated within its budget and has contributed in the general terms. I mean, this is a what, 4 or 5% underspend this year. I think it's done very well in contributing to everything else. The flip side of the coin is that a lot of the services that are in front of us here are valued by our constituents, residents, and they're not getting as much bang for their buck, I'm afraid, and that's going to continue. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Right, are there any other questions on this particular item before we move on to item 7? Nobody online? Right, okay, well, thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, Chris, for those answers. Thank you for the questions. We'll move on to Customer Service Contract Centre response, and Sharon, who is with us, is going to take us through. I think you have a presentation, don't you, Sharon? Yeah. Oh, right, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, can everybody hear me? So yeah, good morning everyone. So I'm Sharon. Is that better? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, good morning everyone. So I'm Sharon Jones, Head of Customer Services. So coming with a presentation on our performance at the moment or over 2024. So Sarah, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So I've given a brief slide here of all the different channels that we take, if you like. So focusing first on telephone calls, you can see that we actually take over 600,000 calls in 2024, which is a huge volume, and that can range from just over 2,000 to over 3,500 a day. So that's the kind of demand we're trying to tackle, is those peaks where it goes up and down. Of those calls, 79% is resolved at the first point of contact. So the customer is able to report something to us or get an answer to their query at that point. And that's actually increased by 5% since 2023, which I think is a real positive in terms of the investment we've done with our staff in training them up on all the different areas now. We're a unitary authority, so they can deal with more at the front door. We have a target average wait time of 5 minutes. That's our target. And it's fair to say there are times when we're over that, but there's also times that we're under that as well. And recently it shows that about 80% of those calls, which is about 475,000, are actually answered within 5 minutes. So that's really positive. It's also worth pointing out there that safeguarding, which is our priority line, is actually dealt with much quicker. So that's where somebody's reporting in a safeguarding concern either for children or for an adult, and we ensure that we make that a priority, and our advisors are answering that line at the moment within 40 seconds. We do have challenges within the service, without a doubt. Our biggest challenges are with council tax being one of our largest queues. That's predominantly because it's back office legacy systems. So we still have 4 different systems for that area. That's systems, back office systems, and also processes. And our adults, they get huge spikes in demand. You can't always predict it. And along with that, we do get a high turnover. It's actually quite a challenging line for our advisors to be dealing with. And the training for that line actually takes longer than the others as well, just due to the vastness of what they need to learn. So that's our telephony side, but it's also the bottom left that you'll see there, a box, all those other channels that we deal with. So digital channels in terms of social media, website contact, and we deal with over 156,000 emails during 2024, along with web messenger inquiries. We do make sure that we're prioritising our digital channels. So we have a response time generally for about those in 24 hours. If I go up to the top right, we've got there our customer surveys completed. So we do want to get insight what our customers think of our service. It's not a huge intake, but they do get the option at the end of a call to leave a response to how we performed. And actually the satisfaction rate of those surveys is 84.77%, which I think is a really positive statistic there. We also, for vesting day, had our single number, but we do have, I think it's over 60 queues. So when our customer hits us with one number, there's still 60 different directions that call could go off in. We introduced a welcome bot for vesting day, which helps our customers navigate that complex queue system by just voice. So they can say why they are calling, and we get about 88% of those callers to the right queue. For those that don't, they will go off to speak to an advisor so that we can get them. I think it's worth pointing out there as well. So that avoids those long IVR, which is where you have to press 1, 2, 3. We don't have that so much on our queue, which actually means our caller gets to the right queue within about 1 minute, which is actually a really good performance. At the bottom right is another box about our face-to-face. So we have two types of face-to-face. We have customer service points where our customers can come in and actually speak to somebody and see somebody in person from the customer service team. And we have what we call our customer access points, where they can go into different locations, and all of those locations are libraries, and be digitally supported to go online. I've broken down there the percentages because it's about 29,000 visitors do come into our customer service points a year, and you can see the majority of those are Bridgewater and the Taunton area, and the lowest number is in our Yeovil. In the last year, we've actually converted 5 other customer service points, and that was Frome, Glastonbury, Wells and Street, and we're currently converting Willerton as well to move away from being customer service points. They don't have a particularly high footfall, and for that reason, we're converting them to customer access points. And we've also taken a new approach in all our customer service points to be about self-serve. So when our customers come in, it's all about them helping them to go online and self-serve, and we've seen an increase in that take-up as well. So if I can go to the next slide, Sarah, thank you. What I've done here is broke it down more into those top services that we deal with, because you can see there that revenues and benefits is absolutely our highest volume. It's nearly 29% of what we get coming through, and that's the one that we've got a particular challenge with because those systems aren't aligned. Also, it shows that revenues and adults are above our target. We know that we do have some challenges in those areas, like I've already spoken about. We do also at times, when there's high demand and limited resources, customers may experience, so whilst we do talk about a 5-minute average wait, there are times where customers could be on the call, and I know it's a shocking figure, but sometimes exceeding an hour. It's not ideal, and it might be over a lunch period where it's particularly spiked in demand, but we don't have the capacity for those big peaks. But it is unusual. That's what I want to point out, but it can happen. It is a complex queue system, and we do have teams that are dealing with legacy processes, with those back offices not aligned, which is one of our challenges with both the council tax line. And at the moment, we don't have all the resources in the right areas as well, which is why you see across those services, some services performing better than others. This is some of the legacy teams that we had, and we are working hard to align some of that. And our children's team, which you can see there, are performing really well. They've got an average wait time of under 2 minutes, but they're no longer just dealing with children's calls. We're changing the way we work, and the fact that they're taking general inquiry calls, and they took 40% of the calls last month, and registration calls as well. So whilst we're widening the breadth of what some of our advisors are doing, we can still deliver a good service, as we can see there for children's. Right, next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. This one kind of shows the trend data, how we've been performing over the last 2 years. The blue, the teal colour is last year, the orange is this year, and the green line is our target. Last year, when we went into vesting day, we were performing really well. We had a lot more resources at the time because of LGR. We had 7 extra staff. What I would say as well at that time, it was about getting the customer to the right queue and not necessarily dealing with that inquiry. So whilst it might show we've improved, or sorry, not improved, we had an improved service back then, our customers weren't getting dealt with as well, is what I would say. So in September 23, we actually lost that funding. It was removed. and that's when it started to go back up again. In March 24, you can see it absolutely peaks after our sort of January, February months. That's because we get about a 75% increase in calls over council tax billing. And in May and June last year, again, you'll see we went above those targets, and that was the general election. We had an unexpected peak in demand then, and we were also supporting the elections team as well. And in the summer of 24, we did also experience a high turnover. We lost some key staff and could only bring in agency staff at that time. In terms of those mitigations to try and bring it down, we absolutely, like I said earlier, prioritise those safeguarding calls. Our customers are now handled more, so there's less transfer between those calls because we've given our advisors more training. And we are working with other services to kind of reduce those pressures. Our team, we are training them up to be multi-contact handling. So we did have a team that would solely do face-to-face or solely do phones. They now do everything, and multi-skilling in terms of those different areas that they can take calls for, so that we're not suffering so much on those priority calls. And we are taking a channel shift approach to kind of manage that demand. So it's all about pushing our digital channels with our customers. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So I just wanted, because we talk about digital first quite a lot with our customers, and I kind of wanted to explain what that meant for us in customer services. So we have a lot of things that we do for our customers whilst they're on the phone to us. That the customer can absolutely do in the same way themselves. So we're delivering exactly the same form as they would do if they were online. So we're not actually adding any value to that customer and that journey. So we have a really strong conversation, and we're training our advisors to have this about using a different channel, about using that online channel. We may suggest they get help from a relative, a trusted friend, or we may suggest they go into our customer service point where we can support them face to face, or to our customer access points. What we're trying to do there is change our customers' behaviour. So there are times where we do have that really good conversation with them. There may be some services that the telephony channel may be removed in favour of the digital one. I absolutely appreciate there are some of our customers who can't use those digital channels, which is why we always will have a mediated service in place, and any decision we take to remove the telephony will have a strong equalities impact assessment to back that up, to make sure that we have considered that and we do have an alternative mediated process for those customers who can't access those channels. Why are we doing that? It absolutely frees up our time for those no added value calls to spend more time with our vulnerable customers, with those customers in adults, social care, children's social care, housing benefits and council tax. They're the customers we want to spend the time in a telephone call with, not those where we're perhaps just reporting a missed waste for somebody when they could actively be doing that themselves. We've had some really good successes already. Waste services was one that we definitely targeted. We've now got the ability to send an SMS while a customer is on the phone directly to their mobile, so they can access the form that they need. And we're having those really strong conversations about using online and changing customer behaviours. We've seen channel shift increase from 67% in November 23 to as high as nearly 88% in June. So we have shown that it can work. And we've moved about 30,000 calls to online. That's what our statistics are showing us. So I think that's really important to hold on to that. We've also, as a council and authority, we've become fully compliant with payments. That's the payment card industry, data security standard. That actually means you can no longer take payments over the phone. You can only take payments via an automated telephony payment system. That means when the customer is on the call, they have to press in their long card number and their CVV number. At that time, when we decided as an organisation we were going to go fully compliant, I did have concerns. We do have customers with arthritis and different equalities that they're not able to use those. And for that reason, we do have an exceptional payment process in place. So if we have a customer who absolutely cannot use those digital options or the automated telephony payment, with a process that we can do it for them. However, I have to say we've been really successful in this, and we've not had to use that. We've been able to actually help our customers find an alternative solution, either direct debit, online, or being able to use the ATP, the automated telephony payment. So that's really positive. I talked about our customer service points, where we have a face-to-face actual customer service advisor being focused on self-serve. And we've changed our spaces, and we're still changing those spaces, removing the reception desk where we can, and having more of a greeter role that will help that customer go over to a computer and self-serve. And we're seeing that 20% of the footfall now coming in the door are actually using the self-serve option. They may be using it with help, but they're still using it, and that is a big increase from where we were before. And the customer service points converted to customer access points is where we're giving that digital support in those locations. So we're using what we call Video Assistant Live. So that gives our customers the ability in those locations with help to get online, and they'll still be able to speak to us in exactly the way you can via a Teams call. We can share screen, we can show them what we're looking at on the screen, we can fill in forms for them, all of those different things, now using that facility. Those calls are answered generally within about, well, our target's 10 minutes. So a customer would come in, be greeted by somebody, sat down at a computer, and that's had a significant saving, being able to take those face-to-face staff out. We've recently added a survey, customer survey on the back of that, the VOWEL system, and we've had really positive scores. It's a score of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, and we've only had 5s and 4s so far. So that's show again. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. We are ambitious, though, that we know there's more we can do. And for that reason, we're now looking at delivering a new ways of working plan, what we're calling our MWOW plan, detailing how we're going to work alongside all the other services in transforming our contact channels, and how we want to transform the front door. That focus will very much be on digital, that digital first approach. There's 4 areas that we want to focus on: the digital first and channel shifts, so looking at the opportunities to drive self-help, and that in turn will reduce demand and that contact coming through. But along with that, we want to look at the service standard and quality. So looking alongside our services, what is the length of calls? Is there a reason we're taking longer? Is there something we could be trained more with at the front door? Looking at that call wait time and seeing what else we can do. Considering failure demand, we do get a lot of calls about failure demand. I'm chasing, I can't get hold of. We want to have those conversations with the services and see how we can help that. And also look at where the handoff is between us at the front door and the back office service. There's also an opportunity to look to grow the service more. What can we do? We are a really cost-effective model at the front door, and there's probably things that we can do and help our services do that will hopefully release some income and release some savings in services as well. And increasing our own efficiency. We're looking at how we organise ourselves. We've got functional leads. We're looking at building the capacity in the right areas now to bring in resilience. We have a skills matrix approach where we're being more fluid with our resources. And of course, we're looking at AI technology as well and seeing how that can help. We've already started quite a lot of that work already, and that's why we've been able to deliver some of the efficiencies we already have. And just finally, we do have our challenges. The next year is going to be hard. We've got council tax billing next week. The bills hit on Monday with an increase in council tax to 7.49. We're going to get more customers call. With a change to our CTR system, more customers are going to be suffering hardship, so they're going to be calling as well. And all of our bills are being posted on the same day. So I have no doubt next week our call volumes will exceed our targets, and at times we will have very long call wait times. It's to be expected. We've done everything we can in the team to prepare for that in terms of training of the staff, looking at our queue systems, looking at our messaging. But when you have such a big demand increase, it's inevitable that you will get that. The impact of the organisational restructure, I don't think it's fully understood from the front door yet, and what that means for us. Are there things that are going to stop happening that's going to create more demand? I think also there's a risk of increased failure demand as people settle into those new structures and into new roles. You know, people may be disappearing from the authority that people are used to contacting. So we have that to do. We still need to push forward with the alignment of the legacy LGR reorganisational queues. You know, we still got multiple teams in different areas, so we need to focus on that. Staff retention is always a concern for customer services. We do have a high turnover. It's not always a bad thing. We're a bit of a growing ground for the authority. People come in, they learn a certain area, and they then go on to that service. So it's a positive for the organisation, but for us, it means we're constantly turning over staff. We've got a contact centre architecture procurement exercise to do. So we currently use a particular platform that needs to go out to procurement, and we need to watch out for the advisor burnout. What we mean by advisor burnout is our team can be constantly on the phone, one after the other. You can only do that for so long, and it's just making sure we've got some of those well-being plans in place, making sure our teams are supported. So, and during those high demand months of March to July. We've also got the end of the capita contract in September 25, so the return of revenues and benefits service from the Mendip area. So at the moment, council tax is in 4 different areas, but for the East area, Mendip, it's actually those phone calls are dealt with by capita. So we're taking back that piece of work, so we need to focus on that. Thankfully, the revenues and benefits teams are consolidating their systems. That will help us when they've completed that, but we've got a process to go through until that's completed. It's probably about another 12-month plan to do that. There will be system downtime, no doubt impacts on customers again, which will increase that demand at the front door. And of course, unplanned spikes in demand, whether we have situations, you know, with flooding, those sort of conditions where we always see a peak, the storms hit us. And our other challenge is to create that strong digital approach across the entire organisation. That digital first approach can't just be at the front door, it needs to be embedded in all our services. And to do that, we need to get out there and talk about what that means for our customers and how it can make a difference at the front door. Concludes my slides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So very comprehensive. If you could turn your mic off, please. If we could open it up to councillors, are there any questions on that? Marcus and then Dawn.
I was in the absence of any other hands. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, I have to confess, when I saw this on the agenda, I thought, customer services, and actually you've made me appreciate actually how vital you are. And I mean, I thought it was interesting. I've got quite a few questions there. I need my glasses. I think there was one thing. There was, well, first question was, I noticed my maths isn't great, but I figure that is not those. I calculated that being about 84% when you on the percentages. So I assume the others are just like, I don't know, 0.5% for licensing, etc., etc. So that's what that is. So actually, they're the top one. I'm quite shocked actually that highways is only 3%, but maybe that's because people do that online. I wonder if parking services might be a little bit higher in the future. With regard to the other question, sorry if I'm going through questions there, I was writing it down and we revised the emails because it's one of those where whenever I've corresponded as a customer, I've tended to go by emails, and obviously you got the response time there within 24 hours, but is that the actual target response time or the actual response time? Because I've waited a lot more than 24 hours for a response to an email, and I think there's Or it's me, I've left mine on actually, sorry.
That would be various. So those emails could be ones coming into adult social care or children's social care through professionals, because we deal with those at the first point of contact. We, as generally as customer services, don't promote an email address. We promote our contact us online, because that pushes our customers online and we get it in a better format. Emails are unformatted, they're hard to pull the data from. Whereas if customers go online and submit a contact us inquiry, we know what they're inquiring about. We can collect all their critical details like name, address, all of those things. And then that comes through to us. The emails, there will be emails across the authority. I think that's where we want to get that strong digital culture, that actually we could be the front door for other services. And rather than having email addresses, if we push our customers through the front door, they may be able to find a resolution to what they're asking.
My other question.
Do the dance to the microphones. That'd be good, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my other question was advisor burnout, because and I wonder, I mean, do you have, because I can just imagine, bearing in mind the resource issue that we have, or just let's call it what it is, lack of staff that we have in some respects. And I assume that advisor burnout, what's your sickness rate like? I mean, I heard stories. What's your sickness rate like? I mean, is not your own personal, the team's sickness rate. I heard, I mean, they hear about people going off with exhaustion and things like that. And is that the exception, or is it a growing trend?
I would say it's the exception. It's something we just keep an eye on and make sure our teams are supported. Our sickness, I think, is in line with probably other services across the council. It is a harder role to do when you're feeling unwell, without a doubt, if you've got a headache or things like that, if you're constantly on the phone. But in terms of advisor burnout, that's something we do keep a close eye on as team managers, making sure that we've got a good wellbeing package wrapped around our staff.
But I'll leave it at that for the time being. But what I would say is your response time is quicker than it is for officers to answer a team message in some respects and some departments. But thank you.
Thank you. Dawn, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see some of those response times. And certainly if I go to any of my generic highways, what have you, emails, I certainly don't get a response within 24 hours. In fact, I'm quite often waiting weeks and weeks to get responses to the generic emails. And then maybe that's something we need to take up with individual directorates, but it would certainly be helpful to get those kind of levels of responses as councillors. Really, really helpful to see some of this. I am concerned, I guess, looking forward about the council tax letters that are going out and how you are going to deal with that as best you can. I'm presuming the letters have been produced already, but I think if we can put any promotion out, any publicity out to say, please understand, if you are going to be wanting to raise a council tax query, you may have a wait time. If we can do something on our general Somerset Council Facebook pages, what have you, I think just to prepare people that it is a busy time, because this is what we as councillors get. We get told, oh, I've been trying to phone up about my council tax bill and I've had to wait 20 minutes. And, if we can just pre-warn people, it definitely creates a better visual that actually people will have an understanding they may have to wait longer through this particular period. I think anything we can do to get ahead of that would be really helpful. And I'm imagining we can't put it in the letter because that's presumably been produced now, that's going out with them. But it would be a real plea from me that we get some message out somewhere about that to really head off what will come our way when people moan and moan and moan about not being able to get through. Because I think possibly you don't get that response through your feedback systems, but we as councillors certainly do get that feedback when people haven't been able to get hold of the council, haven't been able to get through, they've given up after waiting, and we get a lot of moans about that, which perhaps you don't always get to hear. and particularly the one at the moment, is the green waste bins, you know, people not getting the answers to how they can deal with their green waste. It's a real issue that people are mentioning on social media, on talking to us, you know, why can't I sort my green waste out? Why can't I get through to anyone? So I don't know if that's something you've picked up on recently as being an issue. My other question was really about the turnaround in staff. Have you found that changing as things are getting more challenging for the council in terms of delivering what people would like us to deliver? Are you seeing the staff turnout is turnover is increasing because it isn't getting, people are getting more irate or getting more cross or getting more frustrated? Is that creating a bigger problem in recruitment or retention of people? Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the emails, our response time, I should make aware, so that response time might sometimes be us responding, saying it's being sent on to a service. So they won't always get a full response to an email within 24 hours. Comms, we do have a comms plan for annual billing, you'll be pleased to hear. So we're going to put a banner on our website and head off some of that demand where we can. So we're working with the comms team this week to look at putting something on social media as well. I wasn't aware of any particular issues with green waste at the moment.
So there's a problem with people not being able to renew online their green waste collections, or people that are new wanting to get their green waste bins ordered, not able to do that online. And I've certainly heard quite a few grumbles about it. I don't know if other councils have.
I think that's the recent issues they've had. So the service have had some issues with their online forms that they've been dealing with. I'm told they should be resolved this week. So we should see that service go back to normal. In terms of staff turnover, you always do have high staff turnover in customer services, without a doubt. I would say we are finding some of those behaviours from customers more challenging. That is definitely getting worse, and it's something that we've got an eye on. We've actually brought in, as part of our recruitment and turnover, we have an exit interview that we go through with staff so that we can actually pinpoint any of those actual areas where they're leaving. We haven't seen any trends for that at the moment. Most people do leave because they've gone on to other services or a promotional outside of the authority. But it's just the nature of the role, it is always a high turnover.
Okay, thank you. Federica, did you want to add something about the waste?
Oh no, I was only going to come in and say it's still down at the moment because I've just checked, because I personally need to do mine as well. So.
All right, thank you. Right, Hazel, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've noticed that there's now a good response when you report something to Highways. You get a response back fairly quickly saying we'll send someone to inspect, and if you want to track it, here's the number, which is great. I'm still waiting for a list of generic emails, or somewhere that in each department that councillors can just drop an email to and say, you know, this is an issue. So I have to find ways around doing it, which I find incredibly frustrating, because of course we're not allowed to know an officer's name, an email, a phone number, anything like that, because they don't want us irritating councillors contacting them, you know, and taking up the time. I understand that, but actually we do need to have some way of logging issues without having to go to the top. You know what I mean? And it is incredibly frustrating. I'm pleased to hear that people seem to be able to use the digital systems. I mean, my husband was trying to pay using this system for a holiday, and I said, why don't I just go and get in the bus and go into the travel agents and pay with a card? He said, well, I'm doing this now. But I'm thinking, you know, for me, I would find that incredibly frustrating and difficult. But then I'm a Luddite, so but I think a plea is for councillors, I think, is to be able to know, you know, that actually there is somewhere we can go without having to resort to going to Mel Lock or some, you know what I mean? It shouldn't be like that. We should actually have some, and I've got a lot of council housing in my area, And I have no idea now who the housing officers are. No idea. And it is incredibly frustrating that you can't just drop somebody an email and say, can you have a look at this when you're in the area? Because I've no idea who that. People on the bus say, who's our housing officer? Say, I have not got a clue. And they say, fat lot of good you are. And you know, we used to know and we don't anymore. So from my point of view, things are just so much more difficult, really. But I would say highways is the good one at the minute. Thank you.
Okay, Federica?
I was going to say it's good where possible if councillors, just to pick up on Hazel's point, use the online reporting where they can. Though I do appreciate, you know, I'm an avid user of our online reporting, and you do get a quick response and it goes to the right team without needing to have as much human intervention. I think we'll take away the housing officer query, Hazel, because you're a states officer for those who have HRA accommodation within their areas, should be touching base with you when they do estate walkabouts and asking you to come along. So I think we'll take that away to Simon Lewis, who's head of customer in our HRA, and can get back to you with them.
Thanks. Yeah.
Never happened to me.
Yeah, I had a walk around with a housing officer under Somerset Western Taunton. I think it was very, very useful. So I think if we could get that kick-started, I think that would be very helpful. Right. Oh, and on the reporting online, don't bother to report street lights because nothing happens. Anyway, as an aside, Susanna, please.
Sorry. I mean, I totally agree with Hazel about the not having a list of emails, responsible individuals, people's names. I asked for that at the very first induction when I became councillor nearly 2 years ago. I feel like some kind of moron for even thinking such a thing existed. It was a massive assumption that I made, that a simple directory would exist. I assume it still doesn't because I still don't have one and I'm bored of asking for one. The whole thing about emails, not letting people email. I mean, I get that from the council's perspective, it's easy if you can receive it in the format that you want to receive it. But I think from the perspective of somebody who's got a complicated thing to contact the council about, it's highly unsatisfactory because what it doesn't allow you is a record of what you said when you said it, the whole stream that we get from a normal email exchange. And I just find it frustrating and actually insulting to individuals that they are not allowed to communicate with the council in a way that gives them a proper stream of communication. I don't understand why that isn't possible.
When I say so they go online to actually submit it, but actually when we engage with them, that is an email trail. So for a customer, they're coming through that, contact us, and then we get it as an email, we respond as an email, and we can communicate back and forth. So they do get that trail, and I will double check, but they should get a copy of what they submitted as well. So they should always have that. So it's just taking an email, but in a different way that comes into us and helping them go online first. Quite often they can then be signposted to what they need online before submitting it. But I absolutely get your point. There is some complex emails that will come in, and that's still perfectly okay to use that channel. It's like using email, but in a different way.
Can I just respond to that? The problem is, if it's something small and simple, it's relatively easy for people to find the answer. It's when it isn't something small and simple, things, you know, they've got to get into the headspace, work out what they're going to say, have time to do it. And then there's a huge lapse before your system gets it to someone who gets back to them, by which time they then haven't got the original because they have no email, you know, they have no normal email sequence that they can go back to on their whatever their gadget is they're contacting you on. And I just think it's not actually a very satisfactory thing. So I don't see why there can't be an email address for people to send an email if they want to. That doesn't preclude people using your existing system for smaller, simpler matters. Thank you.
What we have found historically, if you have an email address, is customers will just go to use that immediately without perhaps finding the answer for themselves online, which is why we've gone to push our customers more to using the contact us. And I absolutely appreciate what you're saying, and I think I'm going to take that away to make sure that when a customer fills that in, that they get a copy of that via their email, because I think you're right, a customer, and that's where they would also always get those that response quite quickly. So they would get a response within 5 working days.
Thank you. I mean, it might be an extreme thing to say, but probably the reason I'm sitting here at all is because I found the council so impossible to communicate with.
Apologies, is it Sharon that's not being picked up, or was it's yeah. So apologies for you, the online, that you can't see Sharon when she's speaking. I think we're not sure we can do an awful lot about that. Okay. Right, I've got 2 online speakers. First one is Andy Dingwall, and then Sue Osborne, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. 2 quick questions from me about the stats, mostly. Talked about 80% of the calls coming through are under 5 minutes, which is brilliant. It's a really good, really quite strong result. I'm interested though, you hint at some of them are up to an hour. I'd be really interested to know what proportion are significantly over the 5 minute target. So I think I asked for this last time this came round, but you could look at the top quartile of calls, the longest quartile of calls, and take the average of that, and that would give you a good sense, without, you know, take out all the outliers and all that kind of stuff, but it'd give you a good sense of how long the longest quarter of calls are taking to answer, and that might be an interesting one to track as well. The second, if you've got that data now, that'd be brilliant. If not, would it be something that we can get? The second question is more around and I apologize if you covered this in your final slide. I had to dip out to answer the door, but given the likely impact of the restructure that's coming, are you considering letting either the 5 minute target go up to, you know, a longer time, 6 minutes, or the 80% success rate? Is there a flaw there that you're likely to see that slide to that's acceptable?
Thank you. Is that working now? Sorry.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of I don't know that data, those stats, but definitely we can take that away and perhaps look at that top quartile and get the average. I do know it you know, our customers there isn't a lot of customers waiting over that time. It's just awareness that at times they can, but I can certainly have a look at that. Sorry, what was your other question? Was
It was around,
of,
yeah, in terms of the restructure, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of restructure, we are hoping to, we do know probably March and April, we will go over our 5 minute target just due to the extra demand and the resources we have. I'm, though, confident with the way we're moving forward and the approach we're taking in terms of our resources, that we will get more resilient and we will come under to that 5 minute target after that peak period.
So just Chair, if I can just follow. So you're saying you don't expect to need to change either the 5 minute target or the 80% success rate overall. There's no change to the KPIs that are needed.
No, we're not looking to change our target. We are going to be reviewing our target for 25-26, but I'm not anticipating making it any more than the 5 minute average time. We don't actually have the target of 80% within 5 minutes. That was just a figure that I was looking at. We don't actually have that as a key performance indicator. I just think it's a good one to track how well we are doing, because it's always about averages.
Yeah. That's interesting. So there's not actually a target for the success of the 5 minute. What is the KPI that's tracked then?
It's average 5 minutes. So we take an average of all our call waiting times. And as long as that our average is 5 minutes or below, that's our target.
Okay.
So we're always looking at averages.
I would suggest. I would suggest that I take that away and mull it over rather than thinking out loud on the phone. Chair, thank you very much. Cheers.
Well, thank you, Andy. We'll look forward to your deliberations in due course. I'll take Sue Osborne now, and then Susanna wants to come back afterwards. Sue?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Gwyl. It's just a quick question for Sharon, really, sort of looking at the challenges for 25 and the observation over burnout, and that your peak period seems to run sort of from March to July. What options do you have for sort of flexing up? And what I mean by that is that you maybe can bring in extra people, say on temporary contracts, because you know that's your busy time, or maybe even redeploying people within the service, so as you can actually deal with those peaks and troughs.
Yes, thank you, Sue. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. In terms, we are up to our maximum capacity. So in terms of our budget, we can't recruit any more than we are at the moment. We do have a couple of vacancies which we are filling at the moment, but once they're filled, we don't have any more. In terms of that moving resources, that's exactly what we are looking at and doing at the moment, and that's where we are training up people in different areas, and we've done so for council tax billing. We know we don't have the resources in the right area at the moment, and that is what we're working towards.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And what's your time scale for doing that? When do you anticipate to have completed that piece of work?
I think, to be fair, given the challenge that we've got, it's probably going to be at least a further 6 months before we get more of that resilience rolled out. And I think council tax will play a part in that as well when the capita contract ends, because we'll need to take on more staff to be dealing with that contract.
Yeah, and has that been factored into the budget for this year?
Yes, it has.
Good. I mean, in the event that you get serious slippage times, and I know when we did transformation in South Somerset, one of the areas where we really slipped in performance was in revenues and benefits, and it was taking time to process those claims. Is there any sort of capacity or contingency in the event that you really do find you've either got to put in extra phone lines or more staff? Because I think you really are going to be very, very busy.
Yes, absolutely. There is a separate project running for the consolidation work, and that comes with its budget as well. So part of that project group is always looking at those resources, potentially extra demands, and then we will look to spend that budget as appropriate on resourcing if needed.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
All. Thank you, Gwyl.
Thanks, Sue. Susanna.
Just going back to the percentages that you were discussing with Andy there, this 20% who are not responded to within 5 minutes, they are probably the same people who have got more complex, difficult questions to ask. And that's 1 person in 5 with a complex, difficult matter to deal with, who can't have an email address, isn't getting responded to in the timely fashion that you're able to successfully respond to the majority. And I think that us not drilling down into that is a problem, because we're not resolving big problems for people. And it's 1 person in 5. It's not 1 person in 100. It's 1 person in 5. And that's just, I feel like that's not great. And I feel like we're actually like stuck in some kind of red tape vortex. And it's really difficult for people to get answers. And then some of those people reach out to us as councillors. And then we go back to the previous discussion of, we don't have a definitive, simple list of who is responsible for what and what their email address is. And every single matter that I have to try and deal with on behalf of a constituent, I never can get a quick answer. And I just don't understand what all the kind of white noise in between every question and answer is. I just find that I've never had to function in this way in any part of my life prior to this. And I just think it would be really good if we could look at that 20% and wonder how we can deal with them more in a different fashion. And perhaps it is issuing an email address that people can get into contact with. Thank you.
Chris wants to come in. I suspect the answer to your general concern is that it's a policy decision to keep workloads manageable.
Yeah, I was more going to pick up on the 20% point. So the implication with your suggestion there was that they're not getting responded to. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that on average they will take over 5
I didn't
minutes.
say they're not getting responded to. I said it's difficult for those people. And when Andy asked, can we get some more information about those 20%? The answer wasn't, yeah, we can easily do that, or yes, we'll look to do that.
Okay, so I sense the frustration. I'm just trying to be clear that everybody's getting a response. It's just not that 20% of those are falling outside of the 5 minutes. There are over 600,000 calls into the contact centre. And I appreciate that if 20% of those are frustrated by waiting for longer than 5 minutes, I get that, I buy into that. But equally, I would challenge any of you to ring Sky or BT or Wessex Water or EDF or anybody else. These are not abnormal time frames for people to call and wait in a queue to get access. Does that mean it's okay? No. Does that mean we've staffed the service proportionately? Yes, there have been big changes in customer services because they are a non-statutory function, and we go back to all of the other wider implications of the council. But I would hate for anyone to hear the message that those 20% by default are the more vulnerable. They're not necessarily. There will be some vulnerable within there, of course. And we have broken down those stats in slide 3 in terms of which services they're accessing and the average time. So I just want to make sure there can't be any confusion. That we're not saying we're not answering, but yes, they do fall outside of our target 5-minute average.
Okay. Yes, Susanna, very briefly, please.
It becomes more than frustrating for a lot of individuals. So if you're talking about 600,000 plus, then it's 125,000 plus that aren't getting an outcome in a timely or acceptable to them fashion. And comparing it to Sky or, you know, all those other people, those are services that people can choose to financially pay for or not, or swap to a different provider if they so wish. The council is not that. I don't think it's fair to compare the council to those type of you know, Sky, and I can't remember who else you suggested. I don't think that's a fair comparison, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Fed wanted to come in, and then Sharon, please.
I think from my point of view, actually, and I work in a contact centre, not directly at the front line anymore. Actually, I think that we do really well as a council. I can appreciate that waiting 5 minutes can be frustrating for some. However, we can look at all of the many hundreds of thousands of calls that we deal with that actually get answered quicker than that. And actually, the really good stat on there, not just about waiting, I think I want to say is that 79% of calls get dealt with in that first point of contact. So that when actually they do get through to our brilliant customer service advisors, they will look to solve that without having to pass that query on. That does mean that 21% of queries will need to get further support, but we've got to remember, and I think there's a separate query that's being mentioned about queries that come to councillors. I don't get, and I know that I'm a lead member, I don't get many queries as to how to log a pothole, because that is a simple query that most people hopefully can deal with themselves. What I do get when I get involved, and when I get involved even as a lead member, I normally have to untangle a ball of wool of multiple services, sometimes needing to be involved and having to do that element. And a bit like I think Councillor Crevice said, sometimes having to be a housing officer and untangle that. And normally that comes with complex elements as well. I think there's a separate discussion to be had about how councillors can get assistance when they have those types of queries. But I do think as a customer service element, and if we were to look at probably how other councils were performing, and I don't know, I don't call Devon County Council and I don't call other councils, we probably are doing quite well when we look across the contact centre and Southwest contact centre that we're a client of. I think we're doing quite well.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, very briefly, Susan, we're going to have to move on, Susanna. So Sharon, and then Susanna, very briefly, please.
My point was to come back what Fed just mentioned. Actually, it's about those percentages resolved at the first point of contact. You know, of those, and we're not saying, you know, it's an average. We're not saying that they're not getting answered. Like Chris said, all of those calls are getting answered. Very few go long, you know, those really long wait times, and 79%, which is an increase on what we were performing, is resolved at the first point of contact. And that's what we need to focus on, and that's what we want to do more at the front door. What I would say is, of those 21% that aren't, we take all the information needed for the service and we send that over to the service for them to look at and give a response time to that customer as well. So we will set an expectation for that customer as to when they will get a full response. Now, at times, and certainly at the moment, some of those services aren't responding within those timescales, and that's where we get a bit of our failure demand. And that, again, is what we really want to be working on in 2025.
Okay, thank you. Right, Susanna, very briefly, if you want to come
very
back.
briefly, surely we're not here to pat ourselves on the back for the things that we do well. We should do things well. We're here working. We should do things well. Surely what we're here for is to look at the 20% that isn't getting the optimum outcome, to look at the areas that aren't perfect, to look at, you know, going back to our way previous discussion, where we're in the red and understand why. That's what we're here for. We're here to address the problems. So, I mean, clearly I sound like an absolute unpleasant person, because I'm not going, isn't it amazing that we're doing well? We're meant to do well. Of course we do well. What we're here to worry about is the bits where we don't do well.
Okay, thank you. Sharon, you very briefly.
Very briefly, and I think that's why hopefully, you know, I did set out the challenge and our plan to go forward. We know there are areas that we need to focus on and areas we need to improve on, and some of that is working with other services. So absolutely take on your point, and we are looking at that area of work and where we can improve that 20%.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'd like to wrap this discussion up now. I've got Dawn and Marcus. Andy seems to have dropped his hand, so the cogs are still whirring over there. But if I can ask Dawn and Marcus, and then I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are in danger of conflating a few different issues here. There are the frustrations as a councillor to getting response from generic emails that we send to generic email addresses, and the length of time that takes to get a response. And that is quite often based on supporting a resident most of the times. And when we don't get that response, that is incredibly frustrating for us and for residents, because we can't resolve something. And it doesn't happen everywhere. Some are fantastic and get back to us straight away, and they are hugely valued, because that's the kind of pressure we're put under by our residents. They want a response. And I think the difference here is generic response that come in. You flagged already that emergency things are dealt with very swiftly, which is great to hear. I think we're all having to get used to waiting online for any service that we access in a way that people didn't 10, 20 years ago. So I think that's the point Chris was making. It's not necessarily about them being services we can dip on or out of. Everything you phone up these days, you are expected to wait longer than perhaps we used to historically. And it is frustrating if your time is precious. Totally understandable. My question I had was, the 5-minute target, is that the target we've always had? Has that evolved? Is that something we've had for the last 10 years? And is that an accepted industry standard for across councils, if we're not wanting to compare beyond councils? I'd just like that confirmed, please. Thank you.
It's not what we've always had. As legacy authorities, we all had different ways of monitoring our performance. So it's one that we came up for vesting day. It is probably a bit of an organisational standard. Reaching out to other authorities, they have a similar target. Yeah, the average of 5 working days, 5 minutes, yes, is standard generally. But each authority has a different way of quantifying it.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Marcus, very quickly, please.
I will be brief. My business doesn't even have a landline, and if you get a Facebook, if you reply, we never. Well, anyway, I think what we're doing is excellent. in some respects. What I would say is I think this has pointed out I'm always slightly ashamed how little I use Teams, and I think maybe there's a bit of potential training here for councillors on Teams so they can contact people. My actual question to you was about the actual agenda item was 559 social media inquiries answered. That's why I made a flippant comment about me answering a Facebook message. Is it just Facebook, or do we use looking at the younger generation? I mean, I can't log on to Snapchat, but do we have a wide range of things? I remember going back a few years, Somerset Waste Partnership was very good at answering Facebook messages and keeping everybody up to date that way. Is that just specific inquiries, or do we also find that we then use that elsewhere, so we're keeping people informed or responding to comments, etc., that are maybe made?
So those social media inquiries are actual social media messenger inquiries. So they're not comments on Facebook posts. The comms team respond to those. So these are messages from customers, and we respond to them via that platform.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd like to draw it to a close, just to sum up. A very comprehensive report, and I think we've given it a good going over, if that's the right expression. So thank you for that. A couple of points I just wanted to pick up on. I mean, and one you just mentioned in terms of the comms team responding to stuff on social media. There's Nextdoor, there's Facebook, there's now TikTok, all of them. To what extent do you get feedback from them, or does it go into the initial department? Because clearly, if there's something blowing up on social media, whether you sort of get a heads up that something's coming your way, or whether it simply goes into housing or whoever it is.
It tends to go into housing, but if there's something bigger that the comms team think we need to be aware of, then they will reach out and let us know if it's impacting the front door.
Thank you. And the second one is in relation, I mean, on a couple of occasions in your presentation, you mentioned legacy systems, and here we are, 2 years down the line. We've still got legacy systems. You said on your final slide that they were all being brought together, hopefully in the next 12 months. I'm assuming, but I would like confirmation, that your team has a seat at the table when these discussions are going on, because actually, if it's done without your input as to how you work, then we're asking ourselves setting up for failure. But is that correct?
Yeah, when I refer to legacy systems, the one in the next 12 months, that's purely revenues and benefits. There are other legacy systems that will take longer, and they're being managed and looked at within our ICT team. But we are absolutely a seat at the table for each of those projects.
Right, thank you. Well, I'm going to draw it to a close. Andy, I note your point online about picking your KPIs up separately, which I'm happy to do. Sharon, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, committee members, for your input. And we'll move on to item 8, because we're now running severely behind time. So I'll ask Jonathan Sarah, I beg your pardon, Sarah, to talk to us about open spaces.
Hi everyone. Jono's in the room, so it's probably going to be a double-hatted effort, but I will do my absolute best to keep us on track with the time. So today it's just kind of like an overview of open spaces, where we've been, a little bit on where we are, and some of the kind of possibilities for the future, which is what we're going to go over today. So open spaces generally cover within 3 different areas of Somerset Council at the moment. So my space in that regs and ops area, look at playgrounds, parks, playing fields, grass areas within and adjacent to HRA sites, tree maintenance, and then kind of those grass areas around our buildings and spaces that we occupy. Highways, as you'll be aware, pick up verge cutting, roundabouts, things, and also tree maintenance where they are on or around the highway. And then education also have their own kind of grass scheduling, grass cutting at schools, and also a programme of tree maintenance. So currently across Somerset, we've got kind of 3 different directorates that are all having an input operationally. We're doing some work now, once new structures are in place, to try and bring some of these together, particularly where we may currently have different policies around maintenance of trees, for example, and grass cutting schedules. So that's the work we're trying to pick up now. But this is where we are now. So things are done differently. And those that have listened and been at Scrutiny before and heard us talk about it, we all deliver differently. So you'll know in regs and ops that we have the in-house service and depots, and we also have currently the ID Verdi that does outsourcing. Highways and education use a variety of different contractors to deliver their services. So part of this work is about understanding where we need to use those skills and expertise of contractors and where we can use our in-house team. And that's kind of the direction we're heading with that. So this is a first stab of a map with the time kind of that we've got at the moment, is just to develop some mapping. So this is all around devolution here. So we talk a lot about devolution, and Jono can probably come in a minute, but what I would probably say as a starter for 10 is when you look at that map, actually for the areas of Somerset, although we've picked up some of the larger town and parishes, there's a lot of area that we are still responsible for and are still carrying out street cleansing and grounds maintenance works for. When we're looking also at this map and the coloured areas on it, which I'm going to ask Jono to pick up in a minute, that is just for the regulatory and operational spaces. This doesn't include any other assets or any other areas from Somerset, the departments from Somerset. Jono, can you pick up here, please?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, just a bit of an overview, really. On the right-hand side, you'll see the towns and cities that we've been working with on the devolution process. So it's probably fair to say there's 2 or 3 drivers for those towns. With some of those towns, they're ambitious. They want to run their own services, and they have done for some time. So, you know, Bridgewater falls firmly into that category. There's also the location driver. So, you know, that's one of our drivers. If you look at Minehead, up on the left-hand side, you know, that you can see is out on the periphery of the county, and for us that makes sense for devolution. And it just happened to be that Minehead wanted to devolve services for some time as well. And then you've also got the ID Verdi contract. So the ID Verdi contract in the former Mendip, which is expiring on the 1st of June this year. That covers street cleansing, grounds maintenance, trees, play areas. We had to do something with that. So obviously it was an opportunity for us to have discussions with some of the city, town and parishes in the Mendip area to see what desire was around devolution. It's probably fair to say as well, just while we're on open spaces, that open spaces is the primary interest for most of these city, town and parishes. Bridgewater are the only exception. They took on all of the street cleansing within the town. There is some desire around some of the low level street cleansing. So things like the Barrowmen, it is of quite a lot of interest to the city, town and parishes, but it is primarily open spaces that they're interested in. Thank you.
Thanks, Jono. So the devolution impact since vesting day, just as a roundup here. So total devolution savings for our services sit at just above 1 million. So it has had an impact on reducing some of our services. The budget's around there, and around 25 staff or posts have been 2P'd as a result of the devolution work that we have carried out within regs and ops. These devolutions, you'll know, are different for each and every parish council. So some people are looking at play areas, some are looking at the community spaces and whether they can do some work to improve and enhance those. As Jono says, street cleansing is a conversation we have, but it's not something that the most of the devolution conversations focus on. There's also, as you'll be aware, around items around toilets. Grounds maintenance is also something that some of the town and parish councils are taking on. Tree maintenance tends to be something that they are happy to have the trees within the parks and open spaces, but will come back to us or another party to pick up the maintenance and the inspections of those trees. And then around fly tipping, again, if they're picking up cleansing like in Bridgewater, they will pick up that fly tipping. If they're not, then that would generally fall to us. But there's a whole variety of different conversations we're having depending on the size and the complexity of those particular city, town and parish councils as to what we talk about. But we will talk about anything that is within our service area as a starter for 10 for those conversations. So our task list for 2025 and beyond, it's really kind of about getting the basics right. So what we've done since vesting day is had a real opportunity to look at what we do, understand the differences between the different authorities, when we brought different authorities together, and actually try and work through having the best of the bunch, if you like, when we're putting our new delivery model in place. So we've got a new structure coming in from April 2025. We've got new service plans coming into place, and we've got the work around the ID Verdi contract, particularly in the east, that we need to keep keep in mind for this year, because that's a big challenge for the team. I think once we know what we're trying to deliver, once we're clearer on where the devolution locally sits, then actually we're going to be in a much better position to move forward. Other things on the list for this year are income generation, around reviewing the hourly rate, looking at bin collections and whether we can charge for bin collections in certain areas. The maintenance agreement for open spaces. So some of the smaller town and parish councils have come to us over the last 18 months and says, actually, we'd like to use you for some work. Have you got a pricing schedule or a charging rate schedule that we can look at? So when we're trying to see where we can get good value for money, we can look at whether you guys are an option for us. And we need to start understanding and delivering the services that we're delivering to schools currently, because actually schools don't have that operational arm that we do, and we can help out there. The other thing we need to start doing, and we've done some work, is around grass cutting schedules. So as I mentioned earlier, they're different. They're still different in different areas. We're working really well as a service now to bring all those schedules together so that actually the service you get in one part of our district is the same in the other. And we're trying to get those schedules online, which will help, again, with that wider council messaging of you can come online and look at our schedules and you can see where we're supposed to be this week or next week or the week after, that we are coming to you. You've not been forgotten about, and it should just provide a level of assurance there. I mentioned it earlier about bringing those schedules and policies together for tree maintenance. So I think, and all our other areas, so something that's become really apparent to me since the summer when we've had facilities management come within the regulatory and operational directorate is actually, facilities management use contractors to cut grass in many assets, around County Hall where you are now. That's been delivered historically by an outsourced contractor. It's now an opportunity that we see and we look and we just say, actually, we need to take control of some of these contracts, understand who we're asking to do what for us, and then we can actually try and deliver the service in-house, which is great for the morale of the team, and also hopefully will reduce our spend on external contractors. Anything to add there, Jono?
Not only really around the schedules. So I think, now we have a new structure in place. So we've been through that process, same as everybody else. We know we will be bringing in the ID Birdie team, insourcing that and keeping those staff in from the 1st of June. So at that point, we started to look at that work and we started to kind of harmonise the amount of cuts that we're going to do across the county. So it is still a work in progress. It will still take some fine tuning, but there's lots of opportunity for us to start accessing different areas from different depots as we normally would have done. So, for example, operating the Mendip contract out of Glastonbury allows us to get east, and it allows us to get south, so we can get to places like Langport, and we can get to places like Cheddar and Castle Carey and Bruton, where we may have travelled from other depots to do that. So we can bring the teams close together, and we have much greater resource to spread around the county than we had before.
Yeah, I think this slide is kind of picking up on what John is saying there. So we've looked at the east of Somerset in terms of that insourcing for ID Verde. We're starting to look at where we will have a depot. So we will have a depot in Glastonbury. Who is that, and what communities is that going to serve, so that it helps us to start delivering in those areas. And we can also then pick up that from the Glastonbury depot, we might pick up areas like Cheddar and Axbridge, as well as the areas within the east. So it's about really making the most of the spaces we have where we have our staff based, so that we can challenge what we've done historically as a service. And that is it.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Right, I've got Martin and Dawn wishing to speak. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the list of towns mentioned, it's interesting to see Glastonbury in that list when there are about 3 or 4 towns larger than Glastonbury, which are not on the list. Is there a reason for that? Thank you.
Sorry, was that for where the depot is or for the devolution?
Devolution. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'll pick up, John, if I'm getting it wrong, then please come in. But the conversations with those towns also the ID Verde contract covers the former Mendip District Council area. That contract is coming to an end in June 2025. Because of that, the council made a decision to insource that work to us. And during the last 18 months, where we've been into the financial emergency, and obviously town and parishes were asked whether they were interested in any of our services for devolution, it was considered by those former Mendip town, city and parish councils to have a look and come together as a group to see if there's something they can do to pick up where ID Verdi have been doing it. So certainly those 5 or 6 town, parish and city councils in the former Mendip area have come onto our phase 1 or tranche 1 of that devolution programme, if you like, mainly because of the situation they found themselves in and we found ourselves in. So what is happening in those areas that we won't in-source all of those services because the town and parish councils have taken some on board through devolution. That's why Glastonbury is there now.
Okay, thank you. Dawn?
Yeah, many thanks, Sarah and Jono. I'm just going to put a plea in for a copy of the slides that you've been sharing, because they are different from the slides that I had attached to my ModGov, and they're quite useful. So if we could share those slides that you've presented from today, that'd be really helpful. I've always asked for all councillors to have a map of their area. I don't know if that work is ever going to happen, but it could save an awful lot of our queries if we had a picture of what was whose responsibilities for our patches, so that we weren't chasing down the wrong people to get responses, or so that's just something I will keep asking for. It would certainly make most councillors' lives easier, and I'm sure it would save an awful lot of your emails if people had that clear picture of what areas were whose responsibilities, especially given the devolution process going forward. I think that's going to get even more confusing perhaps for some people to know where they're supposed to go to ask for areas or ask questions about areas that need addressing. So yeah, just repeat that plea. The other thing I just wanted to ask was a more generic point, is how are you finding this devolution impacting on the contracts that you will be renegotiating? Are you finding you are still able to get the deals you were getting before with contractors? Has there been any impact that a lot of it has been devolved elsewhere? Are you finding it's creating extra workload for you because you have so many different places now that you are dealing with? It's not so one centralized. Just be really interested to hear from you what impacts, if any, you're seeing of this change that has come about in how services are being delivered.
I think for us as a service, certainly it has created a lot of workload, particularly for Jonathan in terms of delivering on these devolution packages for the city, town and parish councils. I think because we remain flexible and largely, other than the ID Verdi contracts, we're able to be really flexible within our service in terms of where we deploy teams and how we work, and we can upscale and kind of downscale where we need to. We haven't had the issues so much of contracts. Going forward, for some, we will need to start looking at them, but often the contracts that we have are around like our maintenance systems for kind of tree maintenance and things like that. So actually, they won't be that largely impacted by the pockets that we now won't be servicing. I think it's also important to remember that street cleansing is going to carry on throughout Somerset largely. So actually that there won't be so much of an impact there. I think that what is moving forward now, something we've got to focus on for this year, is where teams in the depots and out and about have seen people leaving, transferring out, TP'd over to city, town and parish councils. That's not a very settled or great place to work, and they kind of see that actually is there a threat that actually their work is just being diminished. As part of this restructure, we've been able to reset what we're expecting of our teams on the ground, and we are now recruiting for staff within those teams because there is work to be done. As part of the restructure, we've now got to a place where we say, actually, we need to get this right. And we had, whether we'd held vacancies or whether through natural wastage people had left. So what those teams are seeing now is a bit of confidence going forward. They're seeing the ID Verdi contract coming in-house, and actually there is work to be done and we need to get teams engaged on. We're talking to the teams about reach from depots, about whether they could just go that little bit further on their rounds and their routes, and it's it's involving them in part of that conversation. So there's a lot of change, but going forward, I think we will end up with a better service.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, just a comment from me, really. I suppose in terms of personal impact, I suppose, and impact on the teams. One of the difficulties with, well, not difficulties, but now it's a unitary. You do lose a level of local knowledge, and it's taken time to get that back. So previously, we worked together at SWT, and I knew who the friends group was in the park. I knew what tree they were talking about when they spoke to me, and you don't necessarily have that now. You're very reliant on your local teams, and what's become quite clear as well through the devolution discussions is, again, they have been quite positive discussions because those town councils have that local knowledge and they can talk to you about specific areas and specific issues. So I think that's taken some time to get to grips with. Is because we've lost a lot of people in different areas. You've got someone based in one part of the former district who's being asked questions right across the patch, and that's taking some time to get on top of.
Okay. Thank you, John. Susanna?
I just wanted to check, when you look at, for example, Glastonbury and Frome having taken over 40% of their public spaces, as a council, are we confident that we have the funding and the workforce in place to maintain the rest of it adequately, please?
Yes, it's a short answer.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I think with the 40% for those two places, I think, again, you're with the city, town and parishes, you're dealing with them at different stages. So some of the bigger councils already have open spaces teams and they're just adding to them. Some are starting from the beginning, so they only want to take on what they feel they're comfortable with. But yeah, we are absolutely working in tandem with those town councils to make sure that the areas that they are not taking on, we will continue to maintain. Yeah.
Thank you, that's good to hear.
Okay, thank you. The irony of becoming unitary to remove a tier of local government, which is now heading into reverse, is not lost on me. But anyway, a couple of things, Sarah, if I may. You mentioned trees. Of the three directorates who look after bits and pieces of land, you mentioned trees. You also, I think, suggested that trees were dealt with separately in different ways. Now, knowing how risky trees can be, I'm a little bit concerned about that, and I just wanted to just dig into how different the approaches were, whether it's just a question of using different tree surgeons to come and check them, or whether there were sort of different inspection rates or things like that, because that's the kind of thing that needs to be harmonized very quickly.
Yeah, no, there's no, we're having the conversations with the corporate health and safety team, so there's no impact on health and safety or risk from that point of view. It's more of an overlap that we're just trying to get right. I think maybe Jono can come in here and talk about trees with far more confidence than I can.
Yeah, so I don't think trees are any different to anything else. You've got a mixture of in-house teams. So in ops and regs, we have our own surveyors who go out and survey our own trees, and we have inspection regimes, 1 to 5 years based on where they are, the health of the tree, those sorts of things. In other services, they have external contractors who go out and do that work, and they have perhaps it might be arguable that the level of risk is different or less in other areas as well. So I think it's all okay, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. It's just that we do things differently in terms of the use of contractors who goes out and surveys the trees, that sort of thing. And again, you're bringing in public rights of way as well. So there's trees on public rights of way, and there's a lot of work that goes out to contractors in clearing public rights of way. You've got the National Landscape Services. Again, they do things differently. They have external contractors rather than their own internal tree surveyors. So it's just trying to understand. And trees is a good example. If we're going to survey all of the trees in the county that exist on all of the different sites, what's the uniform way of doing that? And then setting at the level of risk that we're comfortable with around the surveys as well.
I mean, I think that's right, because that we have to have an organisational system for this. I mean, we can't have it what might be described as piecemeal. I mean, for example, the National Trust has one system of dealing, and they've got masses more property than we have. And I think what concerns me that if there was, God forbid, an accident in one part of the estate or the broader estate, whether we could be criticised for potentially having slightly different arrangements in different parts of the council that could be implied to be a contributory factor. I mean, that's the kind of thing I would like to be assured about, that we are actually coming up with a watertight system for managing trees. I mean, I'm a school governor in Milverton, and there are a lot of trees on site there, some with TPOs, and the school has to pull people in to come and deal with them every now and again. And it always seemed ever so slightly ad hoc and on the basis of it was the responsibility of the school, which I think I understand it, but I wasn't entirely comfortable with. And so I'd much prefer to have a sort of organisational umbrella, if you like, even if the school has to pay for it. At least we're all on the same page in that regard. Are we getting towards that situation?
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. There's a piece of work at the moment that is live that IT are leading to understand what different systems everybody's got to record the tree inspections. So in ops and regs, we have a single system now. And I could, if you ask me when a tree was last inspected, I could tell you. So from my point of view, we report that as a KPI. I'm very comfortable with that. But I think that's best practice, and I think that's where we all need to get to. And that is the piece of work that is being done. That is the direction of travel as an outcome.
I'll just, before I come back to Dawn, one other question. You mentioned fly tip devolution, I think, Sarah. I didn't think we could devolve responsibility for picking up fly tipping to third parties, because obviously if it's dumped on a farmer's land, they have to pay to dispose of it. So if you devolved it to, I think, Bridgewater Town Council, is the Town Council now responsible for all costs of disposal, when in fact previously it would have been at this council, which presumably would have been a lower cost? How's that work, please?
Yeah, so the cleansings, obviously some of the cleansing work is statutory, isn't it? So there is, when we're devolving it, we're remaining that oversight and to make sure that they are doing it properly. They will pick up fly tips for us if it is on the land that they have now taken on as part of the devolution programme. They won't pick up fly tips on private land or HRA land or anything like that.
Dawn?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify tree business. So, Jono, I don't tend to come to you if I've got a query about a tree. I tend to go to the highways trees generic email, or to a certain man I won't mention that everyone knows is the tree man. So I just want to check what is the right route if someone raises concerns about a tree to me as a councillor. Where should I initially direct my query to?
So if it's a tree on a piece of open space, that's me. If it's trees on highways, it's highways at the moment.
So if it's a tree on highways, that's the generic highway trees email. Okay.
Yeah, and probably the best thing to do is if you go onto the website, you'll be able to report an issue with a tree on an open space, and it will go through to the right team.
So that's not part of the highways report?
No, problem. If you search parks and open spaces on the website, there's a specific query form for open spaces, or you could just come to me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, if it's a tree in a park or open space, it is a responsible operational services deal with. Yeah.
And what's this site? I don't think I've ever used this site that you're saying is there for open spaces. So that's,
yeah. If you just raise a normal general inquiry, you'll have an opportunity to say it's to do with open spaces, and it'll come through to our team. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I need some education on all these routes, and I think it is an issue for councillors that we do need to work on communication processes, which I will be taking.
Yeah, and I think I think that is a challenge, because we've been going through, staffing wise, we've been going through a period where there's been a lot of interim people in post. Post April the 1st, we will have a responsible person in that area, in that area, in that area, and that I think will help you.
Okay, thank you. No other queries. I think the last point is quite interesting, because several of the discussions this morning have raised the issue of contacts and who do you get to contact and where do you go. So I think since we have our director with us, I will drop it in his ear that the organisation, particularly post April 1st, might consider an in-depth training or briefing session on how to use the various online facilities. And so I think even Hazel Prasanki mentioned Teams. I think we perhaps, oh, it's Marcus, whether we could all use a sort of Teams training session. So I'll leave that one there. I think we've had quite a good meeting. I'm sorry we've overrun by half an hour, but we've had some fairly interesting discussions and fairly in-depth discussions about the topics in front of us. So thank you all for that. Before I close the meeting, I would like to pay tribute and thanks to Jenny Murphy, who has been our clerk for the last 18 months. And this is your last meeting today. If you could tell us what your secret is and being able to escape, I think we'll all follow it. But Jenny, thank you so much for everything you've done. And we're very grateful to have you, and best of luck in wherever you go. Yes, thank you. Susanna.
Oh, sorry, there was just a couple of things I wanted to ask while we're in the room. Is there anything scheduled? So I think I've asked about it before, and I think I've been told it will happen at some time in the future. I'm just wondering if that time is coming closer, for us to discuss Gypsy, Romany and other traveller issues, please.
Are we talking sites or the subject in general?
Both.
That falls within our remit, doesn't it, Chris? We have. Yeah, well, I will ask Jenny as one of her last acts to place it on our forward plan, and we'll work out when we can bring something forward. Was there anything specific you wanted to?
Not really. There's so much. So, and Jenny, that will be a very suitable final act for you.
I mean, if there are any specifics you want particularly answered urgently, if you could let me know.
Yeah,
and
okay.
we'll drill into that
or
first.
Maybe we'll have a conversation. Maybe we could have a conversation at some point and then put something together. The other thing was, are we imminently to get some kind of report from Fusion? I know that they're having issues with the leisure centre in Frome, so I don't know if we're going to have anything from them, or who we can contact about that, please.
I don't know. We have the leisure centres with us. Fed's got a hand up.
I'm fully aware of, I guess, comments from the community in relation to Frome Leisure Centre, and that's being handled by Dan Webb, who's our head of service for culture. Me and Dan and Nick, as the associate lead member, are going out to meet their service manager soon and to have a tour of the sites. We have differing relationships depending on our 4 contracts across the county as to how those leases and contracts work, and we're working with all of them about how we can bring different things forward to this committee, but each of them are different because of how those contracts were written.
Yeah, I mean, we had a press. They're all coming out with. We're all at different stages of leisure contacts, and I think the long-term aim is to try and bring them as close together as possible. Yes, Suzanne, sorry, I did interrupt.
Yeah, no, thank you, Federica. I was just asking that on behalf of somebody in Frome. Is it possible by any chance that local members could be invited to attend that meeting as well, please? Thank you.
There's going to be a direct one just with myself in Fusion and our officers, but we will look to do something about how we involve local members separately alongside. I know the town council are keen to be kept up to date.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that brings us to the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you for all your time and trouble and contributions. And we will look forward to seeing you, the majority of you, here at on the 30th of April. Thank you.